So let's talk about card advantage in Commander. In a format like Commander that is extremely varied, and when you're going up against 3 players at once, where each player has things going on and each player is trying to reach a goal, card advantage is essential. You need to find ways to get ahead of your opponents, and card advantage is one of those ways. Card advantage is honestly the most important way. Sure, you could have a 12-12 Galta on the battlefield, but if you've got no cards in hand, what are you going to do? One removal spell and it's over for you. So how do we build our decks in order to get that card advantage? In order to have a leg up on our opponent so that we have more options to do more things, which allows us to get further and further ahead, which allows us to win more games of Commander. How do we do this? Let's start by defining what card advantage is. I like to divide card advantage into 3 separate categories: drawing cards, removal, and counters or protection, whatever you want to call it. Drawing cards is probably the easiest way and most obvious way of card advantage. There are plenty of draw spells in every single color. Some do it better than others. Having more cards than your opponent in your hand is always going to be beneficial, as you have more hidden information in your hand. Your opponents will not know what's in your hand, whereas creatures or enchantments or anything that you actually have on the board is all public knowledge. But having more cards in hand makes your opponents more weary of you. So drawing cards is always going to be a good form of card advantage. Removal is another great form of card advantage. If you can put down a card and it gets rid of one thing or multiple things, that's always going to be good. You always have to check, how much am I paying and how much am I getting out of it? We usually call this by 1 for 1 or 2 for 1 or 3 for 1, anything like that. Let's say I play my Reclamation Sage and it destroys my friend's Rhystic Study. That's always a good thing, and we would call that a 1 for 1 trade. However, let's say I play my Druid of Purification for 1 more mana. My Druid of Purification can get up to 3 cards off the battlefield. This would be a 3 for 1. It could also be a 2 for 1, and maybe even sometimes at the worst case, it could be a 1 for 1. But you want to definitely run cards that are more 3 for 1s than they are 1 for 1s. Especially with removal in Commander, if you have a 1 for 1, that technically means your 2 opponents that you weren't interacting with get +1, because they're not interacted with at all. They get so much advantage, which is why you want to run more 3 for 1s or board wipes or anything that's just going to get you much more value than a 1 for 1. However, 1 for 1 is typically cheaper in mana value, which makes it a good option to hold for big valuable targets. Now let's go on to the last one, which is counters and protection. We can also just call this interaction. Interaction, protection, counters, any of these things are good because it forces your opponents to use their spells on your permanents, and then you can either counter or protect said permanent. This forces your opponent into a 1 for 1, whereas in most cases, they're going to also be playing 3 for 1 or more. So if you can have protection in your deck, you force your opponents to make a 1 for 1 trade rather than the big valuable stuff they were trying to get. It's important to consider how much mana you will be spending to either protect, interact, remove, or counter your opponent's spells. Sometimes you can spend 1 mana to get rid of something, and that would be considered a 1 for 1. But for only 1 mana, that might actually be valuable enough for you to use it. On the other hand, spending 6 or 7 mana on a board wipe might actually not be worth it, as you were spending almost an entire turn's worth of mana to destroy a board state. These are just some factors that I like to consider. You can also consider whether the fact you're a creature deck or more of a spell slinger deck. That can also choose what type of removal and interaction you pick. In my Marin deck, I have a lot more creatures and I get to reanimate those creatures, so a lot of my interaction is within my creature suite. Whereas with my Kaikar deck, any interaction is always going to be non-creature spells. So this is how I personally define card advantage within Commander. Card advantage is great. You always want to have card advantage over your opponents. You don't always have to have the most card advantage, but you definitely don't want to be in last. You don't want to be the mono red deck that has 1 card in hand after turn 4. You will most certainly lose that game. So now that we've established that 3 for 1 removal or more is really good, we've established that counters and protection are great because it forces your opponent into a 1 for 1 trade rather than a more valuable trade. And we've established that card draw is king. But how do we truly implement this into our decks? Well, first off, we're playing Commander. We have a guaranteed creature spell every single game. So if you can find a commander that has card advantage within it, you are on a great track. If you have a commander that can draw you cards, that can remove things off the board, or that can somehow protect your board or protect itself, you're going to be in a great spot, as you'll have to invest less and less other cards in the 99 towards doing that strategy. Let's take my Samut deck as an example. This deck tries to go extremely fast, putting hasty tokens onto the battlefield and drawing a ton of cards through the commander's effect. This is always great, and I'm almost always having a full grip of cards at the start of my turn. However, my commander does not have removal in it, and it does not have protection in it. So I have to include plenty of cards into those two categories. This is to help with the deck's inherent weakness. Yes, I make a very wide board. Yes, I go very fast, and I get a full grip of cards at the end of my turn. But board wipes are so prevalent in Commander, so I have to find ways around those. In most cases, because I make plenty of tokens, usually it's just spot protection for my commander, and other times it's board-wide indestructible or board-wide regenerate like Rapid Vigor and Heroic Intervention. This deck goes really fast, and when I'm able to have all three of these card advantage engines in my hand ready to go, the deck performs super smoothly. As Commander gets more and more popular, Wizards of the Coast have made a lot of card draw payoffs in their legendary creatures. I'm not a huge fan of this, as it used to be a pretty niche thing that a legendary creature would have plenty of draw payoffs in it. However, drawing cards is so valuable that in most cases I would recommend having a commander with card draw on it. It just makes every deck run that much smoother. The ideal amount of card draw that you draw per turn needs to be 2 to 3 cards. It doesn't have to be you're drawing 10 cards every turn. You don't have to draw 15 cards in one turn with Pride of the Whole-Cade, as nice as that would be. If you can just consistently draw 2 to 3 cards more than your normal draw for turn every single turn, you'll be doing great. Another great payoff is drawing cards based on what your opponents do. Your opponents want to play the game, and they're not going to stop playing the game simply because you will draw a card because of that. This is why Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, Crom, Fairy Mastermind, Consecrated Sphinx, all of these things are amazing at drawing you cards because your opponents are going to be playing the game. They're going to be trying to do the same thing that you're going to do in just a different way. So drawing cards is king. Let's look at a little bit more niche of a category, and let's look at my Legolas Master Archer deck. This deck is a fight spell deck. This commander has removal within it. Anytime you cast a spell that targets something you don't control, you deal damage equal to its power to that creature. This deck is amazing at controlling the board. They're basically going to have no board state in terms of creatures. This allows you to have a huge commander that can kind of just go over any blockers that your opponent might have. But because this deck cannot draw cards on its own, I've inserted plenty of cards that allow me to draw throughout the game. Again, even if it's just 1 or 2 more cards a turn. But let's address the elephant in the room. What if you don't want to use a commander that has card advantage in it? What if you want to play Ren and Seri? What if you want to play Jetmir? What if I just want to play Atraxa? What do I do then? If there's no inherent card advantage in the command zone, that is totally fine. Like I said previously, what your commander lacks, your 99 needs to make up with. Your 99 needs to be really good at playing a commander game, and any weaknesses that your deck might have should be supplemented by your commander, as your commander is a guaranteed spell. Like in my Samut deck, I have no other way of drawing cards besides Samut. This is so that the 99 can be really good at making tokens, removing valuable pieces, and getting myself ahead. That way, Samut can be very good at doing what they need to do, which is drawing me cards. So let's review. For card advantage in Commander, card draw is king. You want to hopefully have card draw within your command zone, but if you don't, make sure to invest around 10 to 14 cards that can draw you cards throughout the game. That might sound like a lot, but you want to be digging through your deck consistently and reliably. Next, removal is great. When it comes to removal, you want to have removal that is not 1-for-1. You want to try to find things that can get rid of multiple targets, and removal spells that could possibly just wipe the entire board. And lastly is counters and protection. You want to have some ways to protect your board state. This then forces your opponent into a 1-for-1 trade, which we've already talked about is disadvantageous to them. If you can force your opponents into a 1-for-1 trade, you have card advantage. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is how I view card advantage in Commander, and this is how I think about cards every time I put something into my decks.